The sand-laden wind swept across the barren street of Gold Hill, Colorado, as Nathaniel Quinn spurred his mud-splattered horse toward the only saloon still standing after the recent wave of lawlessness that had plagued the mining settlement. The year was 1876, and like the centennial celebrations happening across the nation, Nathaniel's life had reached a turning point, though his was marked not by patriotic fervor, but by an emptiness that had hollowed him out from the inside. The wooden steps of the saloon creaked beneath his worn boots as he pushed through the swinging doors. The familiar scent of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies enveloped him. Nathaniel moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes. His reputation as a gunslinger preceded him, though few knew the truth behind the stories, how each notch on his gun had carved away a piece of his humanity. "Quinn," the bartender acknowledged with a cautious nod. "Thought you weren't coming back to these parts." Nathaniel placed a silver dollar on the counter. "Just passing through." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. He wasn't just passing through, he had nowhere else to go. The Civil War had taken his youth, the decade afterward had claimed his conscience, and the last job, the one he'd sworn would be his final, had stolen whatever remained of his soul. "Heard Sheriff Miller's looking for a deputy," the bartender continued, sliding a glass of amber liquid toward him. "Town's been rough since the Blackwater gang came through last month." Nathaniel downed the whiskey in a single swallow, feeling the familiar burn that did nothing to warm the coldness inside him. "Not interested." A commotion at the far end of the saloon drew his attention. 3 men surrounded a slender figure in a dark dress. Even from a distance, Nathaniel could see her discomfort as she tried to navigate around them. "Please, I'm just here to collect the payment for the laundry," her voice carried, soft yet firm. "Why don't you collect something else instead, Mrs. Calloway?" One of the men slurred, reaching for her arm. Nathaniel didn't remember deciding to move. One moment he was at the bar, the next he stood behind the inebriated miner, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. "The lady asked you to step aside," he said, his voice low and even. The man turned, recognition and fear flickering across his face. "Quinn! We were just—" "I know what you were just." Nathaniel cut him off. "And now you're just leaving." The men dispersed quickly, mumbling apologies as they retreated. Only then did Nathaniel allow himself to look directly at the woman they'd been harassing. For a moment he forgot to breathe. Her hair was the color of autumn wheat, pulled back in a practical but becoming style that emphasized her delicate features. But it was her eyes that caught him, deep blue like the mountain lakes he'd once found solace in, before the killing started. They held a sorrow he recognized, yet there was something else there too, a quiet strength that seemed to challenge the very air around her. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "though I could have handled it eventually." "I don't doubt that, madam," he replied, surprised to find a hint of a smile threatening the corners of his mouth. "Abigail Calloway," she introduced herself, extending a gloved hand. "Nathaniel Quinn," he responded, taking her hand briefly. The contact, though fleeting and through layers of fabric, seemed to spark something long dormant within him. "I know who you are, Mr. Quinn. Everyone in Gold Hill does." Her statement held no judgment, merely fact. "I run the laundry at the edge of town. My husband built it before he passed in the mine collapse 2 years ago." The mention of her deceased husband reminded Nathaniel of the gulf between them. She, a respectable widow trying to make an honest living, and he, a man whose hands were stained with too much blood to ever come clean. "My condolences, Mrs. Calloway," he said, stepping back slightly. A small furrow appeared between her brows. "Life continues, Mr. Quinn. We all do what we must." She gathered the payment pouch from the bartender. "Thank you again for your intervention. Good day." As she left the saloon, Nathaniel found himself watching her go, struck by the dignified way she carried herself despite the burden she surely bore. "She's a good woman," the bartender commented. "Too good for this town, if you ask me." "Most decent folks are," Nathaniel replied, tossing another coin on the counter. That night, as he lay on the hard mattress of the hotel room, sleep eluded him. Instead of the usual nightmares of battles and bounties, his mind kept returning to a pair of blue eyes and a voice that somehow cut through the noise in his head. The next morning found Nathaniel at the sheriff's office, surprising himself as much as the aging lawman behind the desk. "Heard you might need a deputy," he said, without preamble. Sheriff Miller looked up, his weathered face betraying nothing. "I do. Question is whether Gold Hill needs Nathaniel Quinn as one." "Fair enough." Nathaniel remained standing, hat in hand. "I'm not looking for redemption, Sheriff. Just something to do while I figure out my next move." Miller studied him for a long moment. "You know, most men with your reputation would have to answer for a few things before I'd consider pinning a star on them." "I've never broken the law in Colorado," Nathaniel replied evenly. "Everything else was sanctioned by someone with authority to do so." The sheriff's mouth twisted in a grimace that might have been a smile. "That's a fine line you walk, son. It's the only one I've got." After a moment's consideration, Miller nodded. "Pays $30 a month. You get room and board above the jailhouse. First sign of trouble that isn't keeping the peace, and you're gone. Clear?" Nathaniel nodded. Accepting the badge, the sheriff slid across the desk. The weight of it felt strange in his palm, lighter than a gun, but somehow heavier with meaning. Word spread quickly through Gold Hill that the infamous Nathaniel Quinn was now wearing a deputy's badge. Some citizens crossed the street to avoid him, others nodded with cautious approval. The miners, who made up the bulk of the town's population, seemed to reserve judgment, watching him with wary eyes as he made his rounds. It was during his third day as deputy that he encountered Abigail Calloway again. She was struggling with a cart laden with clean laundry, the wheel caught in a deep rut on the muddy street. Without a word, Nathaniel stepped forward, lifting the cart with ease and setting it free. "Thank you, deputy," she said, looking up at him with those remarkable eyes. Today they reminded him of the Colorado sky after a storm clear, vast, and touched with lingering clouds. "Just doing my job, madam," he replied, though they both knew it wasn't. "Is that why you took the badge? To help people with stuck laundry carts?" A hint of teasing laced her voice. The question caught him off guard. "I took it because—" He paused, realizing he didn't have a ready answer. "Because it seemed better than the alternatives." She studied him with unexpected directness. "And what were those, Mr. Quinn?" "Moving on or drinking myself to death," he answered honestly, surprised at his own candor. Instead of the shock or disgust he expected, Abigail's expression softened slightly. "Well, I'm glad you chose the badge then. Gold Hill could use someone who knows how to handle trouble." "I've caused more than my share," he admitted. "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but that might make you better at recognizing it before it starts." She gestured to her cart. "Would you care to walk with me? I'm delivering these to the hotel." The invitation was innocuous enough, but Nathaniel felt a strange flutter of nervousness he hadn't experienced since his youth. "I'd be obliged to, Mrs. Calloway." As they walked side by side down the main street, Nathaniel was acutely aware of the curious glances they drew. The notorious gunman and the respectable widow made an odd pair, but something about her presence beside him felt right in a way few things had in recent years. "How are you finding your new position?" she asked as they navigated around a puddle. "Quiet, mostly," he replied. "Though Miller says the Blackwater gang might return. They didn't get what they wanted last time." "The gold shipment," Abigail nodded. "It was delayed because of the spring floods. They killed 2 guards for nothing." The matter-of-fact way she spoke of violence reminded Nathaniel that this was not some sheltered Eastern lady. Abigail Calloway had lived through the harsh realities of frontier life. "You've been in Gold Hill long?" he asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about her. 5 years. Daniel, my husband, brought me here from Denver after we married. He had dreams of striking it rich in the mines. A wistful smile crossed her face. When that didn't happen as quickly as he'd hoped, he built the laundry for me to run while he continued prospecting. That was thoughtful of him, Nathaniel offered. Daniel was a good man, she said simply. Not perfect, but good. The mine collapse took him and 11 others. The laundry became my lifeline afterward. They reached the hotel, and Nathaniel helped her unload the clean linens, carrying the heavy stacks inside for her. When they emerged back onto the porch, he found himself reluctant to part ways. Mrs. Calloway, he began, uncertain what he wanted to say. Abigail, she corrected gently. After helping with my laundry cart, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. Abigail, he repeated, feeling the name settle comfortably on his tongue. Nathaniel, then, if you don't mind. I don't mind at all, Nathaniel. She smiled, and for a fleeting moment he caught a glimpse of a younger woman, one whose life hadn't been shaped by loss and hard work. Would you care to join me for supper this evening? As thanks for your assistance. The invitation startled him. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition if I'm offering, she interrupted gently. 7 o'clock? The house behind the laundry? Before he could formulate a reasonable objection, he found himself agreeing. As she walked away, Nathaniel stood rooted to the spot, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The afternoon dragged as Nathaniel continued his rounds, breaking up a minor altercation at the mining office and checking on a complaint about stolen chickens at the edge of town. All the while, his thoughts kept returning to his impending dinner with Abigail. At 6:30, he stood in his room above the jailhouse, staring at his reflection in the small, cracked mirror. He'd shaved carefully and put on his cleanest shirt, but nothing could disguise the hard lines experience had etched into his face or the coldness that had settled in his eyes years ago. This is a mistake, he muttered to himself, yet he still found himself walking toward the laundry as the church bell struck 7. The small house behind the business was neat and well-maintained, with curtains in the windows and a small garden struggling against the harsh mountain soil. Nathaniel removed his hat and knocked, feeling more nervous facing this door than he had facing armed men. Abigail opened it almost immediately, and Nathaniel had to remind himself to breathe. She'd changed from her work clothes into a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair loosened from its severe daytime style to fall in gentle waves around her shoulders. You came, she said, and he detected a note of surprise in her voice. I said I would, he replied, wondering if she'd been half expecting him to find an excuse. She smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face and sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. Please, come in. The interior of the small house was as neat as its exterior, with simple but tasteful furnishings. A delicious aroma filled the space. It's nothing fancy, she apologized, gesturing toward the table set for two. Just rabbit stew and biscuits. It smells wonderful, he said truthfully. It's been a long while since I had a home-cooked meal. The confession seemed to please her. Then I'm glad to provide one. Conversation flowed more easily than Nathaniel expected as they ate. Abigail asked about his past without prying, and he found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his experiences, his childhood in Missouri, his reluctant service during the war, his subsequent work as a bounty hunter. And now a deputy, she concluded, refilling his coffee cup. For now, he agreed, though the thought of moving on from Gold Hill no longer held the appeal it once did. What about you? He asked, eager to shift attention away from his checkered past. You mentioned Denver before. Is that where you're from? Abigail shook her head. Ohio originally. My father was a schoolteacher. He died when I was 16, leaving my mother and me in difficult circumstances. Her eyes took on a faraway look. We moved to Denver to live with my aunt. That's where I met Daniel, who was outfitting for his journey west. You must have been very young when you married, Nathaniel observed. 18, she confirmed. Young enough to believe in adventure and romance, old enough to know the work it would entail. A shadow crossed her face. I didn't anticipate becoming a widow at 23, though. The admission of her age surprised him. At 25 now, she was considerably younger than he'd initially thought. The hardships of frontier life often aged women prematurely. At 33, Nathaniel felt decades older than his years. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. She met his gaze directly. Life continues. As I said before, we make choices and live with them. The simple philosophy struck a chord with him. How many of his choices had led him to this moment, sitting across from a woman who somehow saw through his carefully constructed barriers? Sometimes I wonder if I've made too many wrong ones, he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. Abigail reached across the table, her hand coming to rest lightly on his. The touch, though brief, sent a jolt through him like nothing he'd experienced before. It's never too late to make different ones, she said softly. The moment hung between them, fragile and charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, as if becoming aware of the intimacy of the gesture, Abigail withdrew her hand and stood to clear the dishes. Let me help, Nathaniel offered, rising to assist her. They worked side by side at the wash basin, their hands occasionally brushing in the soapy water. Each accidental contact seemed to heighten Nathaniel's awareness of her presence, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the graceful movements of her hands, the soft sound of her breathing. When the last dish was dried and put away, the natural conclusion of the evening loomed. Nathaniel knew he should thank her for the meal and take his leave, yet he found himself lingering, reluctant to step back into the solitude that had defined his existence for so long. Thank you, he finally said, not just for the meal, for... He struggled to find the words. For seeing me as something more than what others do. Abigail's expression softened. Perhaps I simply see what's truly there, Nathaniel. The way she said his name gently, as if it were something precious, stirred emotions he'd thought long buried. Before he could respond, a frantic knocking at the door broke the moment. Nathaniel's hand instinctively moved to his gun as Abigail opened the door to reveal a young boy, breathless and wide-eyed. Deputy Quinn! Sheriff Miller sent me to find you! The boy gasped. Ryder's coming into town. He thinks it's the Blackwater gang. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Get inside and stay here, he instructed Abigail, who nodded without argument. To the boy, he added, run to the church. Tell them to ring the bell as a warning. As the boy scampered off, Nathaniel turned back to Abigail. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff. Be careful, she said, and the genuine concern in her voice gave him pause. I will, he promised, then stepped into the gathering darkness. The main street of Gold Hill was eerily quiet as Nathaniel made his way toward the sheriff's office. The warning bell began to toll, and lights appeared in windows as citizens prepared for trouble. He found Miller loading shotguns behind the jailhouse counter. 7 of them, the sheriff reported grimly. Scouts spotted them coming up the pass about an hour ago. They'll be here any minute. The gold shipment? Nathaniel asked, checking his Colt and accepting a shotgun from Miller. Arrived yesterday, in the bank vault. Miller's weathered face was grim. We're all that stands between them and enough gold to fund a comfortable retirement. Nathaniel nodded, understanding the odds they faced. We should position men at the bank and along Main Street, create a crossfire. The next half hour was a blur of activity as they organized the town's defenses. A handful of miners with military experience volunteered to help, positioning themselves strategically on rooftops and behind barrels. When the Blackwater gang rode in, the town was waiting. The ensuing gunfight was brief, but brutal. Nathaniel found himself falling back on skills he'd hoped never to use again, moving with lethal precision as he exchanged fire with the outlaws. Two gang members fell immediately, caught in the unexpected crossfire. The others took cover, returning fire with vicious intensity. A bullet grazed Nathaniel's arm as he dove behind an overturned wagon. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he reloaded and continued firing, acutely aware that the gang leader, a notorious killer named Fletcher, had disappeared from sight. A woman's scream tore through the night, rising above the gunfire. Nathaniel felt his blood freeze as he recognized Abigail's voice. Abandoning his position, he sprinted toward her house, heedless of the bullets kicking up dust around him. The back door of Abigail's house had been kicked in. Inside, Fletcher held her at gunpoint, his arm around her throat. "Drop your weapon, Quinn, or the widow gets a new hole in her pretty head," Fletcher snarled. Abigail's eyes met Nathaniel's, wide with fear but still somehow steady. In that moment, he realized with crystal clarity that he couldn't lose her, that somehow, in the brief time he'd known her, she'd become more important to him than his own life. "Let her go, Fletcher," Nathaniel said, his voice deadly calm as he slowly lowered his gun to the floor. "This is between you and me." Fletcher laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Nothing's between anyone anymore, Quinn. You made sure of that when you killed my brother in Kansas." The accusation hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. He searched his memory, recalling a bounty from years before, a young outlaw who'd drawn on him despite Nathaniel's warning. "Your brother drew first," he said simply. "I gave him a chance." "And now I'm giving you one," Fletcher replied, tightening his grip on Abigail. "Tell me where the gold shipment is, and I'll make it quick for both of you." Nathaniel's mind raced, noting the slight tremor in Fletcher's gun hand, the way his eyes darted nervously toward the window at each sound from outside. The man was desperate, which made him both dangerous and careless. "The shipment's gone," Nathaniel lied smoothly. "Army escort took it to Denver this morning. You missed it by a day." Fletcher's face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "Why would I lie when you're holding a gun to her head?" Nathaniel countered. "Check the bank yourself if you don't believe me. It's empty." The momentary confusion that crossed Fletcher's face was all the opening Nathaniel needed. He lunged forward, tackling both Fletcher and Abigail to the ground, twisting to ensure his body shielded hers as they fell. The gun went off with a deafening roar in the confined space. Nathaniel felt a searing pain in his side, but maintained his grip on Fletcher's wrist, slamming it repeatedly against the floorboards until the outlaw's fingers released the weapon. With a surge of desperate strength, Nathaniel drove his fist into Fletcher's face, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage giving way. The outlaw went limp beneath him. "Nathaniel!" Abigail's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're bleeding." He looked down to see a spreading crimson stain on his shirt. "It's nothing," he tried to reassure her, though the room had begun to spin alarmingly. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was Abigail's tear-streaked face above his, her lips forming words he couldn't hear, and the surprising realization that he didn't want to die anymore, not now that he'd found something worth living for. Consciousness returned gradually, accompanied by pain and the unfamiliar sensation of clean sheets against his skin. Nathaniel opened his eyes to find himself in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through lace curtains he recognized from Abigail's home. "Welcome back." Her soft voice came from beside him. He turned his head to find her seated in a chair pulled close to the bed, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with relief. "How long?" he managed to ask, his throat dry. "3 days," she answered, reaching for a cup of water and helping him drink. "The doctor wasn't sure you'd make it. The bullet nicked your liver." Memories of the gunfight flooded back. Fletcher? In jail, along with the 2 surviving members of his gang. The sheriff's taking them to Denver next week for trial. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup aside. "You saved my life." Nathaniel shook his head weakly. "You saved mine first." I just didn't know it until then. A faint blush colored her cheeks. What do you mean? With effort, he reached for her hand, needing to feel the connection between them. I've been dead inside for years, Abigail. Just going through the motions. But when I saw you that first day in the saloon, something changed. He squeezed her fingers gently. When Fletcher had that gun to your head, I realized I couldn't bear to lose you, even though I have no right to claim you. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. You have every right, she whispered. If you want it. The words hung between them, fragile with hope and possibility. I do want it, he admitted, the truth of it washing through him like a cleansing flood. But you deserve better than a man with my past. Abigail leaned forward, her free hand coming to rest against his cheek. What I deserve is a man who sees me for who I am, not just a widow to be pitied. A man who would risk his life for mine without hesitation. Her thumb brushed gently across his skin. A man who, despite all he's seen and done, still has enough heart left to love. Is that what this is? He asked, the unfamiliar emotion expanding in his chest. Love? Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Yes, Nathaniel, that's exactly what this is. When her lips met his, gentle yet insistent, Nathaniel felt the last frozen pieces of his soul begin to thaw. In her kiss was forgiveness he'd never thought to find, acceptance he'd never dared hope for, and a promise of something he'd believed forever beyond his reach. As spring melted into summer, Nathaniel's wound healed, and his place in Gold Hill became more secure. The citizens who had once crossed the street to avoid him now nodded in greeting, some even stopping to express their gratitude for his role in stopping the Blackwater gang. Sheriff Miller made his position permanent with a raise to $40 a month. Town council insisted, the older man explained gruffly, said we need a man with your experience. But the most profound change was in Nathaniel himself. The nightmares that had plagued him for years began to fade, replaced by dreams of a future he'd never allowed himself to imagine, a future with Abigail. Their courtship progressed under the watchful eyes of the town, with Sunday walks after church and Wednesday dinners becoming cherished rituals. Each moment with her stripped away another layer of the armor he'd built around himself, revealing the man he might have been before violence and death became his trade. On a crisp September evening, as they sat on the porch of her small house watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Nathaniel finally found the courage to speak the words that had been building in his heart. I love you, Abigail, he said simply, taking her hand in his. I never thought I'd say those words to anyone, never thought I deserved to. But you've shown me that maybe the past doesn't have to define the future. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she squeezed his hand. It doesn't, she agreed softly. The future is what we make it together. Together, he repeated, reaching into his pocket for the small box he'd been carrying for weeks. If you'll have me. The ring was modest, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that reminded him of her eyes, but the joy that illuminated her face as he slipped it onto her finger made it seem as precious as all the gold in Colorado. Yes, she whispered, framing his face with her hands. 1,000 times. Yes. They were married on a bright October day, with the aspen trees blazing yellow against the blue Colorado sky. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, surprising Nathaniel with their genuine good wishes. Even Sheriff Miller smiled as he shook Nathaniel's hand, though he quickly covered it with his usual gruff demeanor. Never thought I'd see the day, the sheriff muttered. The notorious Nathaniel Quinn, settled down with a good woman. Neither did I, Nathaniel admitted, watching as Abigail, his wife, accepted congratulations from the townswomen. Guess miracles do happen. Not miracles, Miller corrected him. Just a man finding his way back to himself with the right help. As winter descended on Gold Hill, bringing with it bitter cold and snowdrifts that sometimes reached the eaves of their home, Nathaniel discovered the joy of simple domestic life. Evenings by the fire with Abigail, reading or simply talking about their day. Mornings waking beside her, still amazed at the turn his life had taken. The laundry business thrived under their joint management, with Nathaniel's carpentry skills long unused coming into play as he expanded the operation to include a bathhouse that quickly became popular with the miners. When spring arrived again, bringing with it the first anniversary of his arrival in Gold Hill, Abigail shared news that completed his transformation from the hollow man he'd been to the husband and soon-to-be father he'd become. A baby, he repeated, awestruck, as his hand rested gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Her smile held all the promise of their shared future. Our new beginning, she corrected gently. Though I think it really began the moment you stepped between me and those miners in the saloon. Nathaniel shook his head, drawing her close. No. It began when I looked into your eyes and saw something I thought was lost forever, my own reflection, not as the killer people feared, but as the man I could be. He kissed her forehead tenderly. You didn't just save my life, Abigail. You gave me back my soul. It was never truly gone, she whispered against his chest, just hidden away, waiting for someone to recognize its worth. As they stood together in the doorway of their home, watching the sunset gild the mountains with the promise of another day to come, Nathaniel Quinn, once the most feared gunman west of the Mississippi, now husband, future father, and respected citizen of Gold Hill, finally understood the true meaning of redemption. It wasn't found in the barrel of a gun or at the bottom of a whiskey glass, but in the quiet smile of a widow who had seen beyond his scars to the heart still beating beneath. And in that knowledge, he found a peace he'd never thought possible, a peace that would sustain them through all the years to come.